We are muting people as they come on so that we don't have any background noise. But if you have a question to ask, you're welcome to raise your hand. And I see that it's just about 10 o'clock. So we'll begin here in just about one more minute. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so let's get started. My name is Marcia Conant. I'm the Southeast Regional Consultant, and I will be your host for today. And we want to welcome you to our virtual winter conference and the last in our series. This one is Civic Engagement for Learners, Voting and the Census. We'll be recording our session today, and it will be placed with all the other sessions that we've had on our Wisconsin Literacy webpage. So you're welcome to go back and listen to ones that you may have heard before and really liked, or if you want to hear some that you may have missed, or if you want to refer staff or tutors to one of these sessions, you are more than welcome to do that. If you have questions, you will see that down towards the bottom of that little pull-out screen is a place that says chat. And you may put your cursor where it says type message here and write any questions that you may have for our guests. Or the alternative is to click that little hand that you see at the top left hand part of the pullout, and that will raise your hand. We'll be able to unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question. So either way is perfectly fine. We may hold some of the questions until we get to a point where where our guests can take them. There will be a survey at the end of today's session, and as soon as you close out from this, the survey will pop up. Please fill that survey out. It tells us what kind of job we did, but it also gives you an opportunity to ask for other sessions that you might be interested in us offering. So I'd like to introduce our two presenters today. Our first one is Andy Wilson, and Andy is the U.S. Census Bureau Partnership Specialist. He works with community organizations to educate, engage, and encourage their communities and constituents about the 2020 census. Focusing on populations that are historically undercounted, partnership specialists create coalitions of stakeholder partners to ensure that every human being residing in the U.S. is counted. Andy specializes in migrant farm worker outreach, as well as Spanish-speaking immigrant and refugee populations throughout Wisconsin. Our other guest is Eileen Newcomer. She is the Voter Education Coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. In her role at the State League office, she coordinates their nationally recognized election observation program, oversees the voter education efforts, and supports local leagues in their voter service work. She has more than 7 years' experience in the nonprofit sector and earned her master's degree in socio-medical sciences from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. When not working, she spends her time with family and friends, traveling and volunteering in her community. So we're going to begin with talking about the voters, and I will ask, I'm sorry, we're going to talk about census, and I'm going to ask Andy to begin his part of the program about the U.S. 2020 census.
Let me get put together here.
Yep, it's going to take a second to move things over, so bear with us.
So let me know when you can see my screen there.
We can see it, Andy.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining the meeting today. And because I talk very passionately about this because it is something very important, and that's why, especially some of these demographics that are harder to reach out to sometimes, which I'll explain in a little bit. And
Can you
so,
make that? I'm
I
sorry.
think today's kind of perfect.
Can you
I'm
make
sorry.
it full screen, please?
That is on, yeah, that is full screen on my side.
Okay. Okay.
It's as big as I can get. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Um, And so I think it's a nice marriage of the two topics that we have, voting and census, because it is a civic engagement. And I know a lot of learners, as they're new in our communities, aren't always kind of aware of what those duties are, or sometimes there's a lot of rumors out there. So part of my job is educating, encouraging, and motivating these constituents to respond to our census. And so as a quick overview, we are a very large operation. So I represent the Chicago region, and I put this piece on there because sometimes if there's other questions or comments or concerns, if you can't get a hold of myself, you can actually message directly to our regional director from Chicago here. And so the email is at the bottom of that and the phone number there. So if there's other high level things that, you need some answers to, she has an open door policy for all of those questions. So again, we are the Chicago region. We are 8 states, but I only represent Wisconsin, which is my home state. So sometimes when I'm doing this in front of a live audience, I like to give them some pop quizzes before I put this piece on there. But obviously, some of the things we know about the census is that it is part of the law. So every 10 years, is mandated in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution to conduct a head count of every, I like to say, human being residing in the United States. So we actually did the first one, 1790. At that time, we were not conducting webinars to educate about it, but we still did our best. And there's going to be a theme during my part of the presentation that you're going to see, and that's why I have this last piece bolded. And so one thing I really want to hammer down by the end of this session is that Title 13 of the U.S. Code states that no private information acquired by the U.S. Census Bureau will be shared with anyone, including other federal agencies. So we're going to take kind of a deeper dive into that topic here in a few minutes. Some people say, why should I do it? Sometimes we meet people that say, well, it doesn't really affect anything. It doesn't really matter to me. I'll never see the benefits of participating in the census. And so a couple things that I'm going to point out to you is, besides the obvious ones, the census really does affect federal funding. $675 billion are distributed annually based on that census information. So if we're undercounting a lot of our population here in Wisconsin, we're missing out on a very large piece of that pie, while at the same time, with the legislative representation, if we are undercounted, we could actually lose seats as representation. So we don't want that to happen, because we all want our voices heard on, some very large levels. So those are the two very macro level reasons, but I'm going to show you another piece that isn't normally part of the PowerPoint, but I added it in there, and don't worry, I'll make this bigger too. So when I'm talking to different audiences, people have different interests or different motivations. And so I like to pull out this thing called 50 Ways Census Data Are Used. And if you can see on my screen here, this I can actually zoom in on a bit. I highlighted some, what I think are kind of the more important topics for some of our learners perhaps that might speak to them a little bit more. And I'm going to touch on those here of, why would we want to motivate them to respond, to answer that question, what is in it for me if I do? So we have things such as distributing over $675 billion in federal funds and state funds, but that also means grants, HUD grants, block grants, any kind of federal grant is also determined from that piece of the pie. So if we are undercounting our state and not motivating our learners to also participate in that, we're also missing out on some grants that provide the opportunities for us to work with them. So it is very full circle. Other things that might speak to them is census data is used for forecasting future housing needs for all segments of the population, directing funds for services for people in poverty. A lot of things like Head Start is very affected by this, Medicaid, Badger Care, lots of important programs that, some of our learners might be participating in. Estimating the number of people displaced by natural disasters, that's also very important. The Census Bureau is very involved after disaster relief. In fact, we're involved in a lot of Puerto Rico efforts at the moment as well. Creating maps to speed emergency services to households in need of assistance. Designing facilities for people with disabilities, the elderly or the children. Drawing school district boundaries. planning for public transportation services. So obviously if the count is lower than what it actually is, we might not have enough available public transportation. Establishing fair market rents and enforcing fair lending practices, which I think is very important. And then I have a couple in green that really speak out to this topic today, is directing services to children and adults with limited English proficiency, understanding labor supply. So if people are coming up looking for jobs, we do conduct census because of that. Planning for faith-based organizations, planning for school projects, developing adult education programs, and determining areas eligible for housing assistance and rehabilitation loans. So again, it depends on the audience, but those I think are something that could really speak to the people that we're working with. If they ever say, well, why bother if all it is just getting counted? So it is much more than that. So I'll talk about how the census will be conducted, and I'll come back to this topic here in a little bit, but in about 34 days from now is when Census Day is actually happening. And so we're on the ground really running out there trying to educate everybody on how important it is. So obviously we prefer people self-respond. That is obviously the most effective reason, the effective way to do it. And we'll talk about how they can do that and do it efficiently and quickly in a few moments here. But they do stick this slide in a little early. But if they do not respond to that census, then people will be coming to their doors. And so if you're new in this country, or if you have a hard time, reading the papers coming through in the mail, that can cause a little anxiety, having strangers come into your door if you're not understanding why they're coming to their door, especially if there's language barriers. So we always try to avoid that step from happening. And by avoiding that step, the way we do that is encouraging them to self-respond. And so how are we going to encourage them to self-respond? So some of you might have been in contact with census workers already during this cycle, but a couple of things I think are really neat this coming year, and we'll focus on those here too, is that for the first time in census history since that 1790 count, we're really encouraging self-response through the internet. So I'll show you kind of how that will look and how that'll shape up. So obviously in the past, when they've mailed out the letters, they've always mailed them to the household with a form. We are not doing that as the first step this year. So starting on March 12th, so in just almost a few weeks it feels like here, we're going to be mailing invitation letters to every residential household. So to clarify, we will not be mailing to P.O. boxes. So residential households will be receiving this piece of mail, and in that piece of mail, it will explain, you're invited to participate in the census. Here's the website to do that, and each household will be given a code. So that code they will type in on the online URL, and that'll attach it to that household. So again, we're not sending it to individuals because we don't know who's living in those households. So we're expecting the entire household to respond to that census. Now, if they don't want to do it online, if they don't have online access, and by online, it can be at home on their computer, on their cell phone, at a library. We can also establish what we call mobile assistance centers, which is a neat topic, where we can set up things even at like a farmer's market and have a computer there where people can respond. If they don't want to do that or have kind of issues with that, because not everybody trusts the internet, and I understand that, they can also call it in. So they can call in their census information. It's 10 questions. It shouldn't take too long. We say 10 questions for 10 minutes and answer it that way. And then the third way is if we don't hear by one of those two methods, then we'll send another mailer out, and then that mailer will include the paper form. So after all three of those attempts, if we don't hear from the humans that are responding to the census, then we will be sending people to knock on those doors. So I always encourage people, we've given you 3 very simple ways to respond. So if you really don't want a stranger coming to your door, the way to avoid that is just by responding and taking those 10 minutes. So the other neat thing that came out, which is kind of a first, is this is the first time in census history where we have all these languages on your screen available for assistance. So it's 59 languages on there. And if you look on the left, again, I don't know how big your screens are on your side, the languages in bold are the live languages that you can take the census online. So if you go online, you'll be able to choose one of those languages to conduct your census. And those will be the same languages available if you call it in. So that's kind of what I think is the most convenient way. If you want to have that done, you can go that direction. The other languages that are not bold, we have what are called language guides that are available. So those guides are downloadable PDFs. They're videos online that will walk you through the process. So if people have access to internet, they can do that on their own, or if they do wait, they will have a census taker come to their door, and that census taker will walk through them with the guide in their language as well to walk through that census in person. So I think that's kind of a nice addition to what we're doing this year. And so one thing that you can actually see now is there's a link down here. So I don't know if the recording will be able to click on that link. Otherwise, I can send this PDF later. But this is a video that walks you through how to respond to the online form question by question. The video is done in English. I believe there's actually one in Spanish as well. But if you look on here, things I want to point out, which is nice now, is before you start the questionnaire, you can encourage your learners, they can just click right here and pick one of the languages. These are one of those 12. Actually, I counted 13 this morning. Click on their language of choice, and then they can conduct the census right there in their language of choice live. So they can choose it here, or on this drop down up on top, they can choose their language of choice to conduct that census. So we encourage them to kind of walk through those videos, maybe walk your learners through this video. Again, it will be in English. And you can watch the video on your own time as well. So I think that's a very neat way to do it. With that said, one thing we were just told yesterday is that it's not like doing your taxes. It kind of looks like TurboTax in a little way while you're doing it. However, there's no save option. So it's kind of, you have to put down the time, set aside some time to get it done and save it and send it. Otherwise, if you walk away and it times out, you will have to restart it all over again. So one thing that I take very seriously as a Census Bureau employee, and especially one that works with the kind of the migrant crowd and with many of the people that might not be documented, is the cybersecurity and the confidentiality piece and what is happening to my information piece with this. So the Census Bureau, as you can see here, we have some very strong federal partnerships that assist with threat detection and recovery. And we're not going to be a type of place that says, oh, this happened 3 months ago and here's what happened to your information. No, we're going to be proactive and say, if it looks like a threat is about to happen, we're going to pivot, take care of that threat, and let everybody know kind of what happened and what we did about that. So we do have a very encrypted system that we're using and a very redundant system, as we say in IT, to protect all that information. But obviously, I can't sit here in front of a crowd and tell everybody it can't get hacked. But we are extremely strong and confident on our cybersecurity methods with that to protect that information. So when I'm talking information is when they enter it in online, it's secure. In fact, that's the reason why we do not have a method for them to log in and save it and come back, because that actually posed security risks they were looking at. So the safest way to do it was the fill it out once and send it on. And I do know this one's in Spanish, and I'll get to the next slide here in a second. But with certain populations, they might have a fear of, okay, I'm entering this information. How can that information come back and hurt me? Am I going to be, if let's say I'm living in a household, a one-family lease, and I have 2 other families living here. Will my landlord find out, and will that cause an eviction? Will that cause me problems? While I'm filling this out, there's been a lot of discussion last year about kind of the citizenship issue. And so if they fill it out and they see, oh, this person marked Hispanic as their race, is that going to come back and, set off any bells with other law enforcement? And so when I go out and talk to my communities, the one thing I spend most time talking about is this piece of confidentiality. And so not only me personally and what I've done in my background with the migrant community, just me as a Census Bureau employee, I can sit here and fully say that, it is safe. It is confidential. Information does not go to any law enforcement. They can't even subpoena us or sue us. And that's why at the very beginning, part of that Title 13 code, it is all protected by law. And so their information will not ever come back in a negative way against them. In fact, I'll put these on bigger as well for you. And so a couple things, again, I highlighted on this handout for you is essentially what I was telling you before, is that the Census Bureau is required by law to protect any personal information we collect and keep it strictly confidential. The Census Bureau can only use your answers to produce statistics. Your answers cannot be used for law enforcement purposes or to determine your personal eligibility for government benefits. By law, your census responses cannot be used against you by any government agency or court in absolutely any way. Not by the FBI, not by the CIA, not by Homeland Security, and not by ICE. So there are no exceptions to that. The Census Bureau will not share an individual's responses with immigration, law enforcement, or allow that information to be used for any other benefits, and we cannot allow that to ever happen. And so I take that piece very seriously. And again, we do have that handout in Spanish, which I do hand out to a lot of my constituents. And then, in fact, as a Census Bureau employee, we are bound by an oath to the Constitution for our entire lifetime to protect this information. So when the census is concluded and I move on to my next position, I am still bound by that oath for my entire lifetime to protect that. Otherwise, I am looking at 5 years in jail and $250,000 in penalties. So it's a topic I take extremely seriously. So when are people going to be expected to receive these mailers? So as you can see on your screen, hopefully it's not too small for you. Starting the week of March 12th is when the invitation to respond online to the census will be mailed out. So it obviously might take a week, and we're not mailing everything out on one day because the post office, it's a lot of work for them. So we stagger it. So we will send that out first, and we'll wait a couple days, and then we start sending reminder letters, within about a week of that time, because the sooner we can have this concluded, the better. If we do not hear by the 26th of March, we'll send a reminder postcard. If we still do not hear, then we'll send that reminder letter and paper questionnaire. And then, kind of by the end of April, if we still don't hear, we're going to send one more follow-up, and then we're going to start to knock on those doors, as in that slide that I presented earlier with those census takers. And we are looking for census takers that speak multiple languages to assist in this. So my part of this partner specialist is working with community agencies like yourselves, with the literacy organizations all around the state, and other community groups and churches and farms and all sorts of organizations, to really find where those people that might be historically undercounted, and how can we encourage them that it is safe, it is secure, it is a civic duty. And in fact, it's not only our civic duty, it is required by law to respond to the census, which not a lot of people always think about. So I work with a lot of organizations to do that. And so the groups that we consider typically, they call it hard to count. I prefer the word typically historically undercounted. So we have groups such as children under 5 years old or younger are actually one of the hardest to count. And so as we're working with our learners or other people in the community, what happens is if it's a joint custody situation or a guardianship, it might not have been their home forever, but in more senses than not, if it's a joint custody, we like to say, where does that child spend most of its time? And then if it's a guardianship situation, they might not know how long that child will be there. So we like to say, if that child is going to wake up on April 1st at grandma's house because they're kind of living with grandma for different reasons, that's where we like to have them counted. So the other typically, of course, historically undercounted would be the farm workers and the homeless, language constrained immigrants, migrants, snowbirds, because a lot of them are not here in Wisconsin right now, and people living in poverty. So everything on your screen, if you encounter those demographics, those are the ones that sometimes need that extra push and encouragement and motivation. So we reach out to many different organizations to have that done. We do work here in Wisconsin with Our Democracy 2020, so they have kind of a statewide philanthropic push towards this. They do help some different organizations. The state itself, with Governor Evers' office, is also creating what's called a Complete Count Commission to kind of head this up on a state level as well, because it is very important. And so in your communities, you might have heard about these Complete Count committees, and perhaps some of you have been invited to serve on them. But I kept this slide in there just to encourage you that if you do have one in your community, it wouldn't hurt to reach out to them as well, because they have, what I like to say, tentacles in different areas of that community. They work with the schools, they work with the churches and businesses. And again, it's another way to try to not miss any human being, in the census, because it is important to count everybody. So we work with a lot of different groups. So the committee purpose is to really be trusted voices, ambassadors, help with the marketing, get those messages out there. Because again, there's only 4 of us doing this community outreach in the entire state. So we need a lot of helping hands and, I like to say, tentacles out there. While at the same time, because we do have a lot going on here in the state of Wisconsin, we also offer some pretty decent paying jobs to help us do a lot of this. So as you know, in 34 days, when we start mailing out the invitations, so for those that do not respond, we do need a lot of people to go to those doors and do that knocking. And we are doing a very heavy push right now to get thousands upon thousands of people hired to be those door knockers. So if your learners if they do have a social security number and they can pass a federal background check, let them know that they can earn some extra money for a couple months doing this. And depending on where you are in Wisconsin, Outagamie County is paying $19 an hour to be a door knocker, which is a decent amount, of extra income. So it's worth encouraging them to do that. And just a quick timeline of where we are in that process. We started hiring some of the supervisors for the field work, and as you can see, this month we're going to start trying to hire the door knockers, as I like to call them, the census takers, enumerators, and get them trained throughout the next couple months and really get them on the ground and get them knocking on doors. And what I like to say is we're not going to hire somebody from one county and have them go to a different neighborhood in a different county to knock on doors. We like to hire neighbors in their own neighborhoods so they're not strangers as much when they're knocking on those doors. So I'm not going to show you these maps in a lot of detail because it could be a bit overwhelming for a moment like this. But if you want to dig a little bit more and to understand how are we going to send some of this information out, we have a couple tools that I'll cycle through here at this end piece that really help us to find the right populations, I guess is the best way to say. So about 95% of housing units, as I said, will receive that invitation in the mail. However, there's some different places that might not have kind of a normal street address that we can't mail it to. And as I said, we don't do PO boxes because we need to track by residents. So we do have different ways we might go out into those communities. So as I said, most people will receive that mail, but some people, if they live in an area that's kind of this funny yellow color, and if you click on the link here later, you can zoom in on that. If they live in these kind of yellow, creamy colored areas, that means instead of an invitation letter, they might have somebody, their first visit will be from a census taker because we know it might be a more difficult area to mail to. And so it's worth knowing, if some of your learners live in those areas, to get them prepared that if they don't get something in the mail, then they will have a knock on their door. So it's not that we forgot about them, it's just a different method of reaching out to them. So if anybody is curious on how our state responded to the census back in 2000, 2010, there is another map here, but I can safely tell you that Wisconsin was #1 in 2010 for self-response rates. So 82% of our population self-responded to the census in 2010. So we want to keep those numbers up. We're very competitive. And then we do target different areas that have what we call a low response rate. And so that's based on other data that we've gathered. And so we know, for example, in downtown Appleton area in Wisconsin, we're expecting a very low response rate. So we have to have kind of a higher outreach to that area. So if you work with learners that might be from some of these lower response rates, then it might need a little more extra motivation and encouragement. Maybe we need to ask them to work with their neighbors to get that word out. So you can find out if they're in those lower response rates by going to this website, census.gov/Rome. And it's a neat little interactive map that will show you by color, the darker the color, the lower the response, and show you kind of what you're looking at for those areas. A lot of resources for all of you. There's a lot of media PSAs we can use. You don't need permission to put PSAs out on your local radio station. If you are interested in helping some of your learners get jobs, we have a whole toolkit for that. So a lot of assistance is out there to get that word out. And then, as you saw on my screen, I had a couple of these handouts, such as these. I hope the screen changes for you, that I have here. However, oops, come back. Where are you going? We do have kind of a very large treasure trove of handouts and information and brochures that you can get on our website, all for free, right here at 2020census.gov/partners. And so by clicking on that, on the left side, there's going to be a little mini menu. If you click on outreach materials, you can have access to a lot of different handouts depending on the audience or the message that you want to get across. So there's some pieces for different kind of immigrant groups. There's pieces for different age groups, kind of anything you might think could be helpful to help post around and get that message out. There are a lot of good full color, high quality PDFs out there that you can use, and we please encourage you to use those. And that webpage is available in English and Spanish. However, the handouts are available in more languages than just those two. So there is a drop down to filter by which language you are looking for. And then we do have other resources if you want to follow along and see anything else that might be happening with the census, or just different messages that you can also use and repost on your social media accounts for your groups. All these links have some very interesting things that they're producing. I also follow them on LinkedIn, which is not on here, but they have some very good, precise messaging going on LinkedIn as well to help us, again, get that word out, encourage them that it is a safe and reliable process. So at the end of the day, a couple things that I really want you to get out of this is that it is a confidential process. It is encrypted when they put it on the computer. Nobody will ever have access to that information, and no law enforcement. So none of the information will come back in a negative way. It won't affect any benefits. If you are undocumented, it will not, that we will never know, I guess is the best way to put that. So we do encourage them that it is a civic duty, and we need them to respond for those reasons I showed you earlier, because a lot of stuff that happens in our state and in our country is dependent on these population counts. And I'll wrap up with what I like to tell some of my nonprofit partners is I used to have clients come up to me when I was running nonprofits and say, thank you for the help that you've given us. I wish I could give back in some way, but I don't have the money to donate anything right now. And so I think in this situation, we can tell people like that, by getting counted, you are helping us, in a different way, because by getting counted, you're helping us get access to the right amount of federal funding that we need. You're helping us get access to the community resources. You are helping us by getting counted in the census. So I thank you for listening. And here's my personal information. And some of you might have heard from one of my other colleagues here throughout the state, Yinghua Fu Wang and Ricardo Suarez Alcala. So they are the other three community partnership specialists working in this field. And so if you have heard from them, please continue to work with them. Otherwise, if you don't have a partnership specialist contact, I would be more than happy to continue any local conversations or initiatives with you. So I thank you for your time.
Okay, Andy, thank you. All right. Up next, we'll be talking about voting. We'll save some time at the end if you didn't get to type your question in your chat box. But now let's turn it over to our voting expert.
Hi, everyone. This is Eileen Newcomer. Just to confirm, can you see my screen? Did I do it right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that everyone could see what I was talking about before I jumped in too deeply. Like I said, my name is Eileen Newcomer. I'm the voter education manager for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. And I just wanted to say, thank you so much for talking about civic engagement, the census, voting. It's really important. 2020 is a big year. So thank you for taking an interest in this and for inviting me to come and share some information about voting with you all. I'm going to be talking about one way you can engage learners in understanding their rights and requirements to vote by by talking to them about voting and helping them make their plan to vote. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay. Before we begin, I want to share a little bit about the League, who we are and what we do. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of women and men committed to making voting free, fair, and accessible to all. We've been around for 100 years, forming out of the women's suffrage movement. The League was created to help newly enfranchised women exercise their responsibilities as voters, and over the years, our mission has expanded to empower all voters and defend democracy. We do this by educating voters and advocating on issues. We know democracy is better when more people are involved, and when our representatives reflect and are responsive to the communities they serve. The League is staunchly nonpartisan, meaning we don't support or oppose a candidate or party. And as a grassroots organization, the League is built from the ground up and relies on the work of dedicated volunteers who work on registering voters at schools, at community events, libraries, and other places in their communities, and work on educating people about the issues in local elections. We have 20 local leagues around the state, and if you would like to be connected to a local league in your area, I encourage you to reach out to me. At the end, I have my contact information, so I just want to make a quick plug for that right now. I also want to quickly acknowledge that not everyone is eligible to vote in Wisconsin, whether because of their citizenship status, their age, or felony status. And you may have learners who aren't able to vote. So one of the first things you can do is help them understand, whether or not they are eligible to vote. And the eligibility requirements for voting in Wisconsin are you have to be a US citizen, you have to be at least 18 years old on or before Election Day, You have to have resided in Wisconsin for at least 10 days prior to the election. If you must not be currently serving a sentence including incarceration, parole, probation, or extended supervision for a felony conviction. And this is something that not everybody knows about, that if you were convicted of a felony and once you have completed your sentence, you're able to vote again. So it's once you're what's called being off papers, your right to vote is restored. And then finally, you're eligible to vote if you've not been determined by a court to be ineligible to vote. This most often comes up in cases of guardianship. I don't know how often it would come up for you, but people will know if they have a guardian. And I just wanted you to be aware of that eligibility requirement. So thinking through what you can do to help engage your learners in voting, one of the best things you can do is talk to them about voting. Ask them to vote, let them know that their vote is important to you. Some people aren't registered to vote or have never voted before because they've never been asked to vote or have never been shown how the process works. Helping your learners create their plan to vote will help them see themselves as voters and will give you the opportunity to address any questions they have. On the screen, I have some key questions to ask when helping someone make their plan to vote. Some key questions are, when will you vote? Do you need to register to vote at your current address? How are you getting to your polling place? What do you need to bring with you when you go vote? And what resources will you use to learn about the candidates? And I'm going to be using kind of these key questions to frame the rest of the conversation, to go through the different steps that people take to vote and things that you can do to help guide people through their answers to these questions. And I remember, you don't need to be an expert on voting. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't make it up. People's vote is very serious and you don't want to give them the wrong information. And it's perfectly acceptable to say, you know, I'm not sure, and then help point somebody to the correct, to resources that will help them get the answer to their question. I also want to let everyone know that a little accountability can help encourage people to vote. So if you tell your learners that you'll follow up with them after the election to see how the experience went, that'll also increase the likelihood that they will go and vote. It also helps show that you care about their vote and that they go and vote. So in the first key question is helping people think through, when will you go vote? Some things to consider: are they going to go vote early, take advantage of absentee voting, or are they planning on showing up and voting on election day? It's, I guess, important to know that polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. There are some considerations here. You know, do you work? Are you going to go before work or after work, during lunch? Are you going to need to take some time off from work to go? Do you need to set up childcare so you can go and vote? So these are some things that you can help them kind of think through. I also want to make sure that everyone is aware that there are 5 elections in 2020 here in Wisconsin. First one's coming up really soon, is February 18th. And that's the primary for the state Supreme Court race. And then the primary for the special Congressional District 7 election. And then also the primary for local races like school board, mayor, county board of supervisors. The next election is April 7th. And that's the spring election for the state Supreme Court, those local elections that I just mentioned. And then it's also the presidential preference primary. After that is election on May 12th. That's a special election just for the folks in Congressional District 7. And that's where they'll be selecting who will represent them in Congress. Following that, on August 11th, is the fall partisan primary. That's the primary for races like US Congress, State Assembly, state senate, and then other partisan local elections as well. And then on November 3rd, that's the big presidential election that everyone's talking about right now. It's also the election to decide for US Congress, State Assembly, State Senate, and other local races. So the next question is asking if they need to register to vote at their current address. You can help them think through if they need to register if they're a first-time voter, or re-register if they've moved since the last time they've registered or changed their name since registering. You can also help them look up online to see if they're registered at their current address if they don't know. You're able to do this at the website that's on the screen, the myvote.wi.gov. And then you can also help them, if they need to register to vote, you can help them explore which option works best for them, whether it's online, by mail, or in person at their municipal clerk's office, or at their polling place on election day. And I do want to have put a little extra emphasis on the fact that in Wisconsin, we have same day voter registration. So meaning that people can go to the polls on election day, register to vote, and then also vote all on the same day. Not every state has this, and we're really fortunate to have it here in Wisconsin. You can also help people think through what proof of residence document they will need to use. And to give you a little bit more information about voter registration, there are essentially two different ways that people can register. If they register online, they can do so if they can fully complete the process online if they have their Wisconsin driver's license or a Wisconsin ID card. If they don't have one of these, they can start the process online, but then they will need to print out a paper form and then provide a proof of residence document. So for the paper form, they do need to print a proof of residence document. I'll share some examples later in the presentation. And then they also need their Wisconsin driver's license or ID number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number, if they don't have a Wisconsin ID. And then if they don't have either one of those, there's a box on the registration form that allows them to indicate that, and they can still get registered to vote. Okay, the third question to help people think through is how are they getting to their polling place? Do they know where their polling place is? You can help them look it up if they don't know, and then help them think it through. Like, are they going to be walking there, riding their bike, driving, taking a bus? Do they need to line some form of transportation up to have a ride to their polling place? Thinking through this question helps people see themselves as voters and really kind of gets them in the mindset of where the action is going to be on election day to make this happen. The next question that you can help them think through is, what will they need to bring with them on election day? So here in Wisconsin, we have a photo ID law. So people need to show they need to show a photo ID in order to get a ballot and cast their ballot. Some common photo ID options are Wisconsin driver's license or ID card, passport, veterans military ID. There are a few other options as well, but they need to be on the set list of photo ID options. One thing I want to point out here as well is that address does not need to be current on your photo ID in order to get a ballot. There's some information out there about that, and so I just want to be very clear that people's addresses do not need to be current on their photo ID. The other thing that people might need to bring with them when they go vote is a proof of residence document if they're going to be registering to vote on election day. Some common options for proof of residence documents are a utility bill, a driver's license or state ID if it has their current address on it, pay stub, credit card bill, anything that's been issued by a government entity is an acceptable proof of residence document. This could be things like a fishing license, vehicle registration, and there's a bunch of other options too. One thing to know, if people are going to be registering in person, they can provide their proof of residence document either as a printed copy, or they can show it electronically, like if they want to pull it up on their cell phone. That works great. The next question is, what resources will you use to learn about the candidates? One barrier we hear that prevents people from voting is that they don't know who to vote for, are having a hard time finding candidate information, or don't necessarily know what the different offices do. So how can you evaluate whether or not somebody's qualified for an office if you don't know what the job description is? So some resources I wanted to share with you all are vote411.org. That's the one that's pictured here on the screen. This is the League's resource. This is where we post unbiased candidate information. On here, we also provide a description of what the different races are. And then other great opportunities are candidate forums. It's good to be able to see candidates in person and hear from them, to see how they think on their feet and respond to questions from people in the audience. A lot of local leagues host candidate forums around the state, especially for local offices where it can be really hard to find candidate information. I know a lot of other organizations hold them as well. Another resource is just going straight to the candidates' websites. They post information on there about their stances on issues and what they think are the most important things for voters to know. And then also maybe finding some news articles or interviews to share with folks as well. Some more resources. I really encourage everyone who wants to help others to vote to get familiar with myvote.wi.gov. Is the Wisconsin Election Commission's website for voters. Things you can do on this website are check your registration status, find your polling place, see a sample ballot, see the list of names that are going to be on your ballot, request an absentee ballot, find more information about the photo ID requirement. You can also find your municipal clerk's contact information, and they're a great resource to answer any questions about voting as well. I also want to offer our website as a resource for you. We've got a lot of really great voting information on there as well. We've got information about the candidates and the different races. That's not always necessarily on Vote411, so it's a supplemental resource there. We've got breakdown registering to vote, more information about early voting and absentee voting, and other information as well. I also want to point out that we have information in Spanish for voters as well, so that there's not a ton of information available. So I just want to highlight that as another place to maybe find some additional information for folks who need it in Spanish. And as I promised, here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to be connected to a local league in your area. I'd be happy to hear from you. Or if there are any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them as well.
Yes, feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat box. As you saw, Georgia asked earlier, where can we find all this cool stuff? And Anna responded, it will be on our website. This will be podcast. And I see another one. Our resources on the slide and the previous ones in Spanish as well as in English. And Eileen, I think you said some of yours are available in Spanish, and I know Andrew said yes, they're also available in Spanish as well as a bunch of other languages.
Yes,
So
Correct.
if I could add just a little bit
Please.
more about that. So on vote411.org, that's the site where the league posts our unbiased candidate information. For the statewide races, we do pay to have them the candidates' answers professionally translated into Spanish. So it is a resource for folks to learn more about the candidates and their stances on issues as well. And then my vote is available in Spanish. There is a button at the bottom of the page to switch the language over. And then we do have information on our website in Spanish.
Wonderful. Any other questions? I can't tell when hands are up, but I know, Anna, you can. I don't see anything else in the chat. Oh, there's one. Marianne says, thanks for your work on this. And I would add my thanks to it as well. This has been just an amazing, amazing pile of information. And again, remember, all of this will be going up on the Wisconsin Literacy website, and you'll find both the PowerPoints that you've seen this morning, as well as any other collateral information that we can add. But I think those PowerPoints will take you right where you need to go. So one more time, I'm going to ask if there are more questions. And I don't see any. In the meantime, again, remember, as we close out today, there'll be an evaluation survey popping up. So just wait for it. Once you close out, it's just automatically there. But I would love to express my extreme thank yous to both Andy and Eileen for amazing, amazing programming today. Here's another question or a comment. There are lesson plans for ELL. Oops. And there are links to those on the website. Okay, wonderful. Liz from our Madison office mentioned that. So the question was, are there lesson plans for ELL learners available on the census or in other sources? And yes, as Liz said, those will be up on the website as well. We have other resources other than what we talked about today. And who am I seeing here? Christy is saying that we will use lesson plans in tutoring and in small groups. And I think that brings up an important point. All of this information can be used as extra information when anytime your tutors and students are meeting together. It can be a complete lesson by itself, or it can go along with whatever they happen to be working on at the time. But as you heard today, this is so important, whether it's the census for all of our learners, whether they are U.S. citizens or not, or it's for our U.S. citizen students who need to learn more about voting. Just lots of great information here. Okay, so again, I'm going to thank our two presenters today for some amazing information. And again, remind you that watch for this up on our website and watch for your evaluation. So again, thank you, Eileen and Andy. And thanks to all of you who've joined us today. We'll talk to you next time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.